Hey Freddie, how's it going?
Hello.
So, what I want to do today is I want to just have a quick Q&A, and it looks like you might be the only person here. So, that being said, in the spirit of helping everybody else out, um, I would feel free to just answer me some quick fire questions, and then we can get into some longer questions, and then just basically ask me anything you've wanted to know about the final, and I'd be happy to go through that with you.
Sounds like a plan. I did have a question regarding I think it was the word count. I know on the instructions it says it's like 2000.
Mhm.
I know for me personally, I didn't reach 2000. It was like 1950, like the
It's
word.
I do plus or minus 250.
Oh, okay.
So I don't think I have it on there that it's plus or minus 250. I think I intentionally don't put that there just so people don't intentionally just go to 1750.
Right.
And then according to answer your question, according to it used to be not the case that the word count, according to college policy, used to not count. Now it does. So word count for works cited does count.
Oh, for my email that I sent you.
Yeah, I just saw your email a little while ago, and so I figured I'd just answer it on here. Word
Okay.
count does count, and I believe that's college policy now. It used to not.
Okay. So if that's the case, then I've kind of maybe exceeded the um, the word count.
Cool. And then I am accepting rough drafts until this Friday. And so if there are rough drafts that are already turned in, today is Tuesday, May 11th. If there's any rough drafts that are already turned in, I'm going to start working on those just so I can start giving feedback. So if you've already done the work, you can just kind of knock it out. And then I'm the least of your problems come, next week. Because what's the plan for next week for finals for other classes, at least? Just because I don't have an idea of what's going on. Remember, we're all just at home. So I'm kind of in the dark on like what other classes are doing for their finals next week.
I know for nursing, especially, we have to take two proctored exams, two proctored separate from finals. It's like over the entire course to see how well we'll do on the NCLEX. So we're preparing for that on top of our regular final exam. So um,
That's next week.
yeah, our first big exams this Thursday, and then the rest of them are going to be next week. Like Tuesday, but all of the exams are happening Tuesday, Thursday. So, and then if we don't do good on this exam coming up, that determines how well we'll do on the NCLEX. We have a retake on Monday to because you have to get like it's like based off levels. So there's like level 1, 2, and 3. If you get a
Mhm.
level 2, you pass. If it's anything below that, you have to retake it again.
Got it. So you guys are going to be working on that. So I'm just making sure that I was correct, that I got my dates right in terms of like next week being finals week.
Uh,
So the way that I do finals turn in is I don't just have a predetermined date because we don't really have like an exam for this class. And so they used to have, like, when we were meeting in person, which I'm assuming will be, next semester, they'll have us be uh what's it called, they would, we'd have like a specified meeting time. And so, that used to be when I had grades turned in, or like I had finals turned in. But some people would have a turn, some sections would have a date on Tuesday, some would have a date on Thursday, some would have it on Friday. And so I thought that was kind of unfair for some of the other classes that, they, arbitrarily get, 2 or 3 more days to work on their final than other people do. So I just, just send it to me digitally, put it in the Dropbox, in the final paper Dropbox. That will be available, by the way, on Friday. Like when the cutoff happens for rough drafts, the rough draft link will go away and the final draft link will show up, and that will be the only one available that way. And so whatever your final draft is, that will go ahead and you can put that in there. And then whatever's in that folder, on Friday, I'm going to go ahead and collect it at like 11 o'clock at night, 12 o'clock at night. And then whatever's there is going to be what I grade. And so that's how that's going to work. And so that way, because grades, as you've seen, are pretty much done. The only thing that's remaining is the final. So there's no grade calculations that I need to do outside of just grading your final, putting it in, and I can record your grade. That way, and then on your guys' end, you can review the grades and see what's going on. I noticed that some people are already emailing me for some discrepancies or things that I could have missed, which is easy to do. I'm like putting all these grades in by hand. So, I could have put 0.9 instead of 90, just because my finger slipped. And it could really be something that's stupid. That's why you guys are the best arbiters of checking your grades, because you have a vested interest in it. And each of you can be a good pair of eyes to look at your own grades and just let me know if there's anything that I'm either missing or something you turned in that I didn't record. That's fine. I have no doubt that I made a mistake. So feel free to just let me know what I missed, or if there's any discrepancy in the actual recorded grade, and I'll just make sure to double check that and correct that. It's not a big deal on my end. Just please, if you are going to be doing that, like, don't message me like the last day of like grades getting recorded and telling me that there's something going on. Like, there's a reason I'm giving like so much notice about the grades, is because I really just want to record them come Tuesday. Because the day 2 record grades, the grades that have to be in, is by the following Tuesday. So that would be the whatever this is. That would be, we're looking at it. So next week is finals week. That would be the 25th. The 25th of May is when grades will have to be like recorded and due. So speaking on the final itself, Freddie, is there any kind of questions about structure or how to put things in, or the purpose of some of the paragraphs or the sections that you've seen in the how-to guide, that black and multicolored document? Is there anything in there that you might find of interest, or any questions you might have in terms of clarifying? And here's the thing, even if you know the answer to it, it would probably help to ask for the rest of the class.
I have questions about the final paper, but I want to ask a question about the grading, the point system that you brought up. So I noticed the totals out of like 1150, and then the total class from the syllabus, it's out of 1300, but the final paper is out of 200. I don't know if that's like you're giving us like extra 50 points, which I'm not complaining about.
Yeah, it's out of like my final calculation. That's why I put it that little proviso at the bottom, subject to change. My final calculation for the class is 1350.
Okay, 1350. Okay.
Yeah, so you'll see that once it comes up. So 1350 will be the final thing. So you'll notice that most people right now, the average grade for section 5 is an 85% right now. That is the average. The average grade for section 6. Now, I also want you to put into account, for those of you in section 6, the average grade is a 73. There are 1, 2, 3, 4 students who just are on the recorded roster but have never shown up. I'm assuming that they will be like not people who have actually participated in the class. Like, there's just 4 people in section 6 that just never showed up. Like, I'm assuming they withdrew from the class, but they weren't necessarily off of my roster. I'm assuming by the time that I go ahead and record grades, they'll be gone. So when you hear that 73% is the average in the course, don't freak out too much. I think that's just deflated because of the 4, because they're just straight up zeros. So those are pretty, but everybody else so far, I'm seeing a lot of like what I would call peace out grades. Like, if you were to just not turn in the final, you could get like a B or something like that. There's quite a few people in that position in section 6 and in section 5. There's a lot of people who would just walk out of the class with a B or B minus if they didn't do the final, which I don't encourage. But it's a good position to have if you're shooting for the final, if you're shooting for an A minus in the class. Like if you have a C plus or higher, if you were to account like a 0 in the 1350, you're in a good position. Because you still have to account for those 200 points. Now, the reason why I have it as 200 points is because there are, for every discrepancy I have, I take things off in 5-point increments. So on all of your other uh, papers, that would have been, if I took off 5%, 5 points that out of 100, that would have been a 5% decrease. I intentionally, tie myself down and handicap myself because I'm able to make it basically 2.5% instead of 5%. So I still keep the same point deduction, but the percentage is cut in half. So I inflate the grade in order for you to do better on the final. Just because it's a larger paper too. So let me go ahead and share this with you, and if we can walk through it and see if there's any kind of questions you have for each one of these. That way I can kind of clarify, and this I'm sure will help other people walk through this. So if we're looking for like tips for the final paper, some basics, want to make sure that you follow the outline. The outline presentation that's on Blackboard is the outline for the final. So it does go over like what the structure and output for the final will be, which is what you followed your final, which is what you did your outline assignment on. So here's some basics. Make sure to follow the outline. The outline gives you direct instructions of what to cover and how to cover it. Do not try and reinvent the wheel. That's one of the big things I try and have people do. I'm giving you like example papers and outlines and a how-to guide for a reason. I want you to kind of paint by numbers. I want you to follow the guide. I don't want you to get like uber creative in like how the structure is. I want you to keep the structure as is. If you want to put headings on each of your paragraphs as you're going along, that's fine. I actually do that when I do writing. So when I actually write, I have something that says introduction, definitions, historical context, or if there's any kind of heading that I need to input, sometimes just to keep myself in order, and just know where I'm going, especially when I'm writing the thing. I put headers there at the top of the paragraphs just in order to keep myself going. And that's how I turn papers in. I really enjoy having headers in each section. That way I kind of know. And I even put sometimes subheadings for different things. Just that way I know I'm directly answering that particular thing and I'm not all over the place. That's one of the things one of the pitfalls you don't want to fall into in the final is, you're talking about one topic and then you just go off in another direction without kind of addressing what you were talking about in the first place. So make sure that you're staying focused for each paragraph. And if you need to go into a second subject, if you need to go to another subject within that discussion, just make a new paragraph and then continue there, because each paragraph should kind of like separate out the ideas. And then the sentences within those paragraphs will separate out the details of that idea as you're going through. You don't need an abstract. This paper is too short for an abstract. For those of you who are doing APA, you don't need to include an abstract in the final. It's just, you don't need to waste your time on it. Just get straight to writing the paper. Please make sure that you have a title page, works cited, and the plagiarism statement are required. So make sure that the title page is in, make sure that you have your works cited. Honestly, those would be just the first two things that I put in. That way you're just and then you write the paper in between that like a sandwich. Make sure that you're looking at the writing checklist. I put it there for you to avoid simple mistakes. So the writing checklist is included in every assignment. So make sure that you look at that. Make sure you're not using first person, no I, no me, no mine, no personalized third person, no we, no us. You are not a part of this. You are an objective observer looking at what's going on within your controversial debate. So let's look at each disparate section. So introduction, you want to make sure you introduce the subject. What is the overall topic of discussion? Gun control, immigration, police reform. Then introduce the debate. What is the question that's going to be discussed? Whether or not DACA should be renewed, or whether or not there should be expanded de-escalation training, or whether or not we should re-enter the Paris Climate Accords, or whether or not there should be an assault weapons ban. Be specific about the debate. Then briefly state what the arguments or rationale. There are those who believe that there should be an assault weapons ban for X, Y, and Z, and there are those who believe there should not be an assault weapons ban for X, Y, and Z. And then be sure to include a roadmap statement. So the following paper will analyze the debate over the assault weapon, reinstating the assault weapons ban. And then that's it. That's your introduction. Just a couple of sentences. We did the whole introduction in 5 to 6 sentences. It doesn't have to be crazy long, because the introduction is going to be the thing that you're introducing it. You're just getting it started. It's an appetizer. I think one of the pitfalls that people have is that they feel like they have to like overly explain what the paper's about in the introduction. You don't have to. I see introductions that are like a page and a half long. You don't need to do that. The reason that there's an introduction is to just kind of get us going. You're going to have the whole rest of the paper to discuss what you're talking about, so don't worry about it. Then you go into the definitions paragraph. The definitions paragraph is a completely utilitarian paragraph. You just do this to set up what the terms of art that you're going to be using. For instance, like if you're talking about terrorism, terrorism has 17 different definitions if you ask each one of the individual intelligence agencies. So you want to make sure that you're being clear about what definitions you're using, what terms are you using within the paper that a normal person wouldn't necessarily know. And you want to define those in the beginning. Now, the cool thing about having a definitions paragraph is that you don't have to then, as you go through the paper, you don't have to keep explaining what those terms mean, because the assumption is that while you read the definitions paragraph, you've already set up and explained what it is. If someone needs to get a refresher on what the definition of that term is, they can go look back at the definitions paragraph that you wrote. You don't need to constantly be reminding people what a term means within your prose, within your paper. So just to give you the bullet points that I actually wrote, this paragraph does not need to have a fancy transition. This is a purely utilitarian paragraph to help the reader get up to speed about the terms being used. Make sure to explicitly cite where the definitions are coming from. Dictionary does not count. If you need to use a dictionary, use Black's Law Dictionary if you need to use a dictionary. I would recommend people, if you really need help in defining your terms, just go ahead and pull something out of a newspaper article. That's usually what people will do. It makes life a lot easier without you having to go through. But often, if you're looking at something that's relatively technical, the journal articles themselves should usually define it for you. And you can cite the journal article itself in order to do that. Do not use the dictionary. The terms should be defined by your sources. If you are stuck and cannot find a definition, do a quick research for a newspaper article that mentions or defines your term. Wow, it's almost like I wrote this. So let's look at historical context. Now, when we get into historical context, this is going to be setting up how did we get here? Like DACA didn't happen in a vacuum. The assault weapons ban did not happen in a vacuum. So how do we do this? So you want to give the reader an idea of how the topic of discussion got to where it is now. For example, DACA did not just appear out of thin air. Explain how the current situation came to be. For instance, if we were talking about like the Chinese Exclusion Act and Operation Wetback and the Bracero program, there are a whole host of immigration policies that have ebbed and flowed throughout our history. Massive migration of Vietnamese immigrants during and after the Vietnam War. A large Cambodian presence because of people fleeing the Khmer Rouge and Pol Pot. So there's a lot of stuff there's a lot of history to go over, explaining like how exactly did we get to the attitude we have now with DACA. Or the assault weapons ban. You could talk about the 1965 gun reform bill from LBJ, or the Brady bill or the assault weapons ban with Clinton, or the expiration of the assault weapons ban back in the early 2000s. So this is going to place all the detail about like what laws were passed or struck down that involve the issue, if applicable. This is also a place that you want to mention any major events that shape the discussion of the issue. So you want to give us an idea, like if you were to talk to someone and you're talking about like police reform, maybe they know about Freddie Gray or George Floyd because they've seen it, but it goes beyond that, like Rodney King or the Watts riots, for instance. There's a large confluence of factors and history that go beyond just like the past couple of years. Like George Floyd and Tamir Rice and all of that didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened as a result of a history of systematic um, uh, a series of systematic things that happened, or like the militarization of police after 9/11, race relations with the police and urban areas, the increased policing of areas that are typically Black and brown and poor most of the time, as opposed to white affluent neighborhoods in comparison. So it's like, well, more Black and brown people are getting arrested. Well, yeah, but also more police are also there as well. So over policing Black and brown neighborhoods over under policing white neighborhoods, even though, for example, uh, Black Black and brown people have drug use at approximately the same rate as their white counterparts, even though Black and brown people are often arrested at a higher rate than their white counterparts for similar offenses. So things like that, like, those are going to be the kind of like contextual issues that you're going to bring up that have happened in the past, but help us understand what the discussion is that we're having now. Then once you get that, you set up the terms, you set up how we got here. Now you're actually going to get into the argumentation and the evidence of that you're going to put in. So you want to detail what are the arguments or rationale that each side has for why they take their position. So you want to overview what the arguments are for one side. And then after you give an overview of those arguments, give evidence for each one of those arguments that supports it. And then the evidence that you're using doesn't necessarily imply that the argument is true. So let me make this abundantly clear. Just because there's evidence for it, it doesn't necessarily mean it's true. Vaccines, for example, like let's say there's people who argue about vaccines causing autism. Well, a piece of evidence would say, well, Andrew Wakefield and Jenny McCarthy and X, Y, and Z about, vaccines having questionable, the MMR and the autism link. It's not true, and it's been debunked. But the thing is, that's the evidence that people point to make that argument. It doesn't necessarily need to be true. It's just that the argument exists. So the evidence you bring up simply supports the fact that the argument exists. If the argument is not true, debunk it in the evaluation and critique. So the evaluation critique, just because you're objective doesn't mean that you have horse blinders on to the truth. So your evaluation critique section is going to be very it'll be incumbent upon you in the evaluation critique to basically call balls and strikes, to call BS where you see it. And so you want to consider the section of the paper where you hear out each side. So you want to be able to hear out like, all right, so these are the reasons why people say that there should not be an assault weapons ban. Here's why people say there should be. You're just hearing both people out. You're almost like a little judge. And then once you get to the evaluation critique, you basically look at like, well, here's what's probably going to happen. And here's what the data and evidence and facts point to, and here's what's likely going to happen. So you want to use a new paragraph to discuss each argument that each side makes. So for example, if you have two sides with 3 arguments each, the section should comprise of 6 paragraphs. So you want to separate out a paragraph per argument, not per evidence, but per argument. So you want to make sure, like, is a violation of the Second Amendment, assault weapons ban. Okay, we'll give a paragraph on that. And like, why do people argue that it's a violation of the Second Amendment? The paragraphs for each argument, they do not have to be long. They just have to incorporate all the information that you have for that argument. Be sure to cite every time that you bring up an idea that does not come out of your own head. Yes, this means that you're going to be citing a lot in this paper. Cite, cite, cite. You've already seen this enough from me in all of my critiques from all of your papers across the class. Cite, cite often. You've seen me a lot with my papers, a lot with all of your papers where I say like, well, says who? Like you make a declarative statement, but you don't actually give it any attribution saying like, who said it. don't just drop a quote or a citation and move on. You need to go further and actually give some context as to why the quote or the piece of information you included is relevant to the argument presented and the overall topic discussed. You can't just say like, oh, well, yada, 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 gun reform, and then just put a quote with like no context of like why the quote is there, or no discussion about like how relevant that quote is to what you were just talking about. Like, you have to give it some sort of, you can't let it speak for itself. You need to give it context and connect it to the rest of the conversation that's being had in the paper. And so you're going to continue that process as you're talking about argumentation and evidence, both talking about like why there should be an assault weapons ban, why there shouldn't be, why DACA should be reinstated or why it shouldn't, why there should be physician-assisted suicide nationwide or why there should not. So you're going to be going through this process as you're discussing each one of those topics. And then once you go there, once you're done with putting all those arguments together, now we can kind of draw a line right above evaluation critique, because this is where you're going to kind of just stop bringing in new evidence. So all the evidence and all the data and everything that you want to put in here, that's going to stop once you get to the argumentation, once you finish up your argumentation section, because the evaluation critique isn't for new evidence to be brought in. It's to analyze and discuss everything that has been brought since then. So you have to think about it like you're presenting what the two sides say. You're just hearing them out. You're not arguing with them yet. And then you set them out. And then when you get to the evaluation critique, this is where you call balls and strikes. So once here, you do not need to bring in additional evidence. This is the section where you discuss everything that you just presented within the context of the debate. If there were arguments that were presented that do not conform to the facts, this is where you would call that as being inconsistent, inaccurate, unrealistic, etc. Then explain why, which is the key issue. Like, people often will say, well, this is inconsistent to their argument, and then they'll move on. No. You need to actually explain why it's inconsistent. Why is it inaccurate? Why is it unrealistic? Please note, and I mean this sincerely, nobody cares. No one cares what you feel. I see that sometimes when people say like, well, I feel about this topic. I don't care what you feel. If you have a thought about something, make a declarative statement. Instead of saying like, I think or I believe, just go straight for the jugular. For example, the argument that global warming is a hoax does not conform with the scientific evidence. Straight up. You don't need to go, well, I think that, because of the argument is, no, just make a declarative statement. This is where we get real grad schooly at this point. Or, quote, critics who believe that vaccines cause autism ignore the overwhelming evidence to the contrary. You're just calling it out. And you notice like a lot of these like debunk, it's one sentence. Like, you don't have to like go crazy on it. Like, so I provide examples of how to call balls and strikes. If you call out an argument, explain why. Refer back to the data presented in your previous sections, which is why we're not including any new evidence, because you're going to be pulling from everything that you've done since up until this point. If you find an argument compelling, be sure to detail and cite the evidence that was brought up in the previous sections. And lastly, you want to make an educated prediction of what the future holds for the issue discussed. Be realistic and infer only what the evidence implies. So you only want to make a prediction based off of what the trend lines look like. So you're not going to say like we're just going to ban guns, because that's not what the trends look like. Or we're just going to like give citizenship to everybody and do full-blown amnesty instead of DACA. That's not, even if that's what you want to happen, that's not likely to happen by a long shot, because of just how the trend lines are and how the country feels about immigration writ large. And so then we're going to go to, once you've done that, and this is the most grad school part of the paper, is the evaluation critique. I would argue this is the most important piece. Your argumentation, your historical context, your definitions, all of that is just in service for you to have this evaluation critique discussion. This is the most important part of the paper. This is the part that so when I'm grading the paper, I'm going to look at like functionally, are you giving me a concise and direct introduction? Are you defining terms well? Are you citing those terms? Are you giving historical context to like basically orient us in the right direction? Are you citing and giving a full-throated analysis, reciprocation of, or a recitation of what the arguments are? Cool. Like, are you checking all the boxes, and then did you actually do it? The part that I'm like really like looking at is the evaluation critique. I actually want to see how you break this down, analyze it, look at it, compare it. Everything that we've been doing, like for instance, your hot newspaper was about comparative analysis of looking at different things, looking at different types of data and analyzing their and comparing their similarities and differences. Your journal article analysis is actually breaking down and seeing like what were the disparate parts and how was all of this put together in a really scrutinizing way. Now that you've done all of this, your outline and your annotated bibliography helped you, pushed you to look at a variety of sources and have a diversity of thought and be able to organize that. Now you're looking at like how does this all work? What's actually going to happen? This is the most important part of the paper. And then conclusion. The conclusion is a short paragraph. All you're doing is stating what the paper aimed to do, what was discussed. It should just be a handful of sentences. Like, this analysis sought to look at the debate over de-escalation training in the police. There were those who argued this. There were those who argued this. However, looking at the evidence, it is likely that this is going to happen. That's it. Do not give some flowery ending or rhetorical question like, but in the grand scheme of things, we all have arguments and we all do that. I don't want any of that. I want you to be as direct and utilitarian and analytical as you can. I don't want you to be cute. This is a business professional paper. I want you to write like a professional. I don't want you to write like you're writing for some like editorial board. I don't want you to write like it's some sort of poetry. I want it to be really direct and straight to the point and businesslike. And this paragraph, like the definitions paragraph, is strictly utilitarian, meaning it's just there for function. Any discussion about the future, make sure it needs to be in your evaluation critique. If you're going to be doing anything about like what's happening, do there. You can say at the end, like, oh, so we hit this, and this was the analysis. This is what's going on. I don't want any discussion. You can just make a brief sentence saying like, this is what's going to happen. This was the purpose of the paper. The purpose of the paper was to do this. Just state what was covered in the paper. It should take you all of 5 sentences tops. Like, the conclusion is just there to wrap everything up. That's it. It's just so you're not saying, okay, I'm done. That's all the purpose of the conclusion is there to do, is to just wrap everything up in a little bow saying what exactly the paper went over. And that's the final. That's the final in detail, point by point. I hope that this is not the first time that many of you on YouTube have seen this, because I basically posted this everywhere since day one. So I want you to be able to do that. Oh, a big thing I think I forgot to mention is this paper is meant for you to be a reporter. You are being fair and objective. It is not meant to advocate for a position. You do not say like in the intro of the paper that DACA should be reinstated and here's the arguments why. You're going to get a D on your paper if you do that, because it's not the call of the question. This is not an advocacy paper. And you're like, but you're asking us to tell us what we think is going to happen. That's right. I'm asking you what you think is going to happen, not what should happen. What should happen is what you did in your presentation. You advocated for a position. What you think is going to happen is based off looking at all of the evidence and saying, looking at all of the data, looking at the arguments that are being made, and looking at the trend lines of what's happening, this is what is likely to happen, and here's why that is likely to happen. That is not advocating for a position. That is giving an educated projection based off of the evidence. You're being objective, because maybe your conclusion is, well, DACA maybe, is not going to get reinstated, or there won't be an assault weapons ban, even though in your presentation, you advocated for DACA to be reinstated, or you advocated for an assault weapons ban, or you advocated for not having an assault weapons ban. or, increase de-escalation training, or whatever it is that you're doing, or, mandating vaccines. Maybe you end up determining that there isn't going to be any mandates. So it's all going to be based off the evidence. So that's going to be the thing that we're going to be, that's how your paper should be looking like. So with that being said, Freddie, what are your thoughts or questions or comments or concerns?
Basically, like, because I know for the presentation, it was like you said, it was like what we think, like what we thought should happen, and then, or like what we feel should happen, what we believe should happen, and then because I know you said, like, for me, like, my outline was great, and so whatever I had in my outline, I put in my PowerPoint. And is it okay if it's like what I think should happen is the same way of how I feel should happen, even though I don't like put it in the paper, like,
Yes. So here's the thing. They could be the same.
okay.
Like, that's the thing. It could be the same. Like you like looking at the evidence, you advocated that there should be police reform, and looking at the evidence, it looks like that's probably going to happen in some capacity.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's fine.
Okay.
It's just the thing is, it's about framing. How do you frame what you're saying? Are you saying it is looking at the evidence, this is what's probably going to happen because of these factors, or I think this should happen, and here's why it should happen, and here's all the evidence to support that? You're getting to the same end, but you're framing it in two different ways.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. And then for I believe it's the argumentation and the evidence one. If we find like more evidence than what we originally sent in the outline and in our presentations, can we add it? Is that fine? Or
Absolutely. It's
okay.
not set in stone. Nothing is set in stone until you turn in the final.
Okay.
So the reason I have you do the outline, and the reason I have you do the annotated bibliography, particularly like 3 weeks ago, was because I wanted you to have something to work with by now. Like, that way you weren't starting from square one writing a final.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. So like if we find a new source or something and add it in our body paragraphs, that's more than
Go for it.
fine.
And I'm not going to have as much scrutiny on it as well either. So if you want to add documentaries or blogs or things like that, that's fine. Make sure that you note that it's a blog, or note that it's a documentary, or note that it's like, you don't have to like hide that you're using a website, but you just need to just give it context of like, hey, this is where this is coming from.
Okay.
I think people feel like they're afraid, like, oh my God, I'm using like a website that I'm not quite sure of. Like, you can say like, well, coming from this website, where a person who says this, if you're wondering like who they are, go ahead and just, most of the time you can click on the name of the author and it gives you a bio of who they are or what their background is, to give you some context of like where they're coming from. But it's not a dirty thing to like pull up a TED Talk or something like that you find interesting. The only reason that I have that 10 minimum is 10 newspaper, 10 journal minimum of like peer reviewed sources. Wherever you want to go past that, be my guest.
Okay, yeah, that definitely kind of helps a lot with getting more info and stuff like that. So that helps a lot. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. How about that? Any other questions, or how are you feeling about this?
About the final paper, I turned in my rough draft last night when you first
Open it up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm honestly just waiting on your feedback, but I feel pretty. I mean, as long as we like with our presentation, and because at least for me, like my outline followed my my presentation was my outline, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as long as I follow that, and I think I'm pretty sure it's the same for other people, should be fine. Correct?
Because your presentation, your outline, and your final all have like 80% overlapping work, if not more so.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it is just looking at the evaluation, being a little bit more being more scrutinizing on your data, being more inclusive with more evidence. It's additive, and you're just kind of changing the framing a bit, but you're not like, starting from scratch. So, if you've already done the presentation, the outline, you've done most of the work already.
Okay. Yeah, because I was doing it. I was like, in a way, it feels like copy and pasting, and like, I
Yeah,
don't.
and that's kind of the point because you have to remember that the way that the way that the class is structured is we're not really doing like separate assignments. The idea is that the real assignment is the final, and everything that we've been doing since then is in service of writing this thing,
Right.
and
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
purpose of the paper. That's the purpose of the class.
Yeah. It makes. I mean, yeah, we've been focusing on one top, like my top, like at least for me, like my topic for since the beginning of the semester for like 15 weeks. So
Mhm.
that could be why it feels like that. So it makes sense.
Yeah, and there is going to be a lot of that. And here's the thing: when you're writing something professionally, or you're writing something in grad school, or you're doing something of that sort, you're going to have a lot of different kind of iterations. You're going to talk to other people about it. You're going to have people other look. You're going to look at it. You're going to do extra research on it after you've kind of mulled over. So this is very indicative of the professional writing process, or a graduate level writing or doctorate level writing process. Um, the amount or the only really thing that changes a lot with it is just how many pages it is, or how many sources it is, or how in depth it goes, but the actual process itself is the same.
Okay. Makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, so I hopefully that answers a lot of questions for people, and sees and kind of clarifies what's going on. I thought this was going to be a short session. We're at 53 minutes,
Oh,
so
really?
yeah, it's already 4:44. So I think this is going to be a really in-depth discussion of what's going to go on with the paper. So hopefully this helps people. And I'm going to go ahead and if do you have any other questions, or should I call it here?
No. Are you gonna have office hours for today and Thursday, or?
Yeah, I'm going to have office hours.
Okay, then I'll probably see you in office hours in a couple of minutes then.
Okay, sounds good. All right, then I'm going to go ahead and end it here. And I hope everybody takes a look at this. And I think this is going to be really helpful and instructive, particular for people working on their finals. Cool. All right, Freddie, talk to you soon.